human baby risked his life to help the mother bear giving birth. What happened next will shock you. Let us know where you're watching from. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Emma Reed received the call. The weather-beaten ranger station, nestled at the edge of Northbrook Wildlife Preserve, provided little comfort against the persistent drumming on the metal roof. Emma had been a wildlife conservationist for 12 years, but something about this particular morning felt different, heavier somehow. "Wildlife Division, this is Emma," she answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder while sorting through the previous night's trail camera footage. "Emma, it's Mark. We've got a situation about 2 miles up from Cedar Creek." Mark's voice carried the distinctive tension she had come to recognize over the years, the tone that meant a difficult decision was coming. "Female black bear appears injured. Local hikers reported she's been in the same spot since yesterday, barely moving. They said she looked distressed." Emma closed her eyes briefly. The preserve had been facing increasing pressure from development on its southern border, pushing more wildlife into shrinking territories and often resulting in injuries as animals navigated unfamiliar terrain. Every intervention decision weighed heavily on her, the balance between helping an animal in crisis and respecting the natural processes that had governed these woods for centuries before humans started drawing boundaries. "Any signs of cubs?" she asked, already reaching for her weatherproof field journal. "None reported, but given the time of year," Emma nodded to herself. "Late spring. Potentially a mother with newborns. I'll head out there now. Send me the coordinates." Within 20 minutes, Emma had loaded her gear into the preserve's mud-spattered Jeep. Standard medical kit. Tranquilizer rifle, though she hoped she wouldn't need it. Radio. GPS unit with Mark's coordinates blinking steadily. The muddy access road wound through dense pine forest, the green so dark it was almost black in the rain. As she drove, Emma found herself reflecting on what had brought her here. 12 years of difficult choices, the rehabilitation center she'd built from a single shed to a facility that had successfully released dozens of animals back into the wild. The criticisms from both sides, those who thought she interfered too much and those who thought she didn't do enough. Sometimes she wondered if she'd made any difference at all in the struggle between wild spaces and human expansion. She parked where the road ended and continued on foot, mud sucking at her boots with each step. The coordinates led her off trail, through a section of old-growth forest that had been spared from the logging operations that had scarred much of the region decades before. The bear came into view gradually, first as a dark shape against the ferns, then more distinctly as Emma approached with careful, measured steps. The animal was large for a female, her dark fur slick with rain. She was alive, her sides rising and falling with labored breaths, but she made no move to flee at Emma's approach. A worrying sign. Emma stopped at a safe distance, raising her binoculars. The bear's right hind leg was caught in what appeared to be an illegal steel trap, banned in the preserve for over 30 years, but still occasionally set by poachers. Anger flashed through Emma, quick and hot, before the professional in her took over. She could see blood darkening the fur around the trap, but the injury didn't appear fresh. The bear had likely been struggling for days. "I see you," Emma whispered, more to herself than to the suffering animal. "I'm going to help you, but we need to do this carefully." The situation presented exactly the kind of ethical dilemma that kept Emma awake at night. Intervening meant stress for the animal, risks for herself, and uncertain outcomes even if everything went perfectly. Not intervening meant prolonged suffering and likely death. Natural processes were one thing, but there was nothing natural about a steel trap. Emma retreated to call for backup and prepare a plan. As she reached for her radio, a subtle movement near the bear caught her attention. Her breath caught in her throat. Partially hidden beneath the mother's body, barely visible, was the tiny form of a cub. And from the mother's posture and the dampness surrounding her, Emma suspected there might be more. Newborns, perhaps delivered while the mother was trapped and unable to properly care for them. The rain continued to fall as Emma faced one of the most challenging decisions of her career. Whatever she chose to do next would irrevocably alter lives, both animal and human, in ways she couldn't fully predict. Emma retreated to higher ground and radioed Mark. "I've got visual confirmation. Female black bear with a leg caught in an illegal trap. She's given birth while immobilized. At least one cub confirmed, possibly more. I'll need a full rescue team with sedation equipment." "Copy that," Mark replied, his voice crackling through the static. "Dr. Nichols is on call today. I'll have her meet you with the veterinary trailer." "And Mark," Emma added, her voice dropping, "bring the documentation kit. We need to build a case against whoever set this trap." While waiting for backup, Emma observed the bear through her binoculars. The mother occasionally shifted position, weakly attempting to gather her cub closer despite her pain. Each labored movement revealed glimpses of tiny forms beneath her. Emma counted at least 2 cubs now, possibly 3. Newborns, still wet from birth, their chances diminishing with each passing hour in these conditions. 40 minutes later, Emma heard the low rumble of approaching vehicles. Dr. Vanessa Nichols, the preserve's veterinarian, arrived first, followed by Mark and 2 other rangers. They gathered at Emma's position, speaking in hushed tones as they assessed the situation. "Those cubs won't survive much longer in this weather without proper maternal care," Dr. Nichols said, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. "And the mother's condition is deteriorating. That trap has been there at least 3 days, judging by the wound. We need to move quickly," Emma agreed. "Standard protocol would be to tranquilize her, but with newborn cubs, it complicates things," Dr. Nichols finished. "The sedation could affect her milk production, and separating newborns from their mother, even temporarily, creates significant stress." Mark scanned the area with experienced eyes. "There's something else. These traps are usually set in series. We need to check the surrounding area for more." That was when Emma noticed it. A subtle disturbance in the brush about 30 yards to their right. Something metallic glinted in the rain. "Mark, over there," she pointed. "I think you're right." As Mark moved carefully to investigate, Emma continued planning the rescue operation with Dr. Nichols. They would need to sedate the mother just enough to safely remove the trap and treat her wounds, while minimizing separation from the cubs. "I've got another trap here," Mark called out. "Recently set, and there are boot prints, still visible despite the rain." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Poachers didn't usually venture this deep into the preserve unless they were tracking something specific. "We need to sweep the entire area before dark. If there are more traps—" A sharp crack cut through the forest, a branch breaking under weight. Everyone froze. "Someone's still here," Mark whispered, his hand moving to the sidearm he carried for protection against the occasional aggressive wildlife. Emma gestured for the team to spread out, staying low and quiet. The mother bear, sensing the tension, tried to rise but collapsed back down with a pained grunt. The movement revealed a 3rd cub, smaller than the others, barely moving. Through the sheets of rain, Emma caught a glimpse of movement. A human figure moving away from them, deeper into the forest. Without thinking, she started following, keeping to the cover of the trees. The terrain grew steeper as she pursued the shadowy figure up a rocky incline. "Stop! Northbrook Wildlife Authority, she called out, her voice nearly lost in the downpour. The figure paused momentarily, then continued climbing. Emma pushed forward, mud slicking her path, making each step treacherous. As she rounded a large boulder, she came face to face with a man in his 30s, dressed in camouflage gear, a hunting rifle slung across his back. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder as he recognized her uniform. "You're on protected land," Emma said firmly, trying to control her breathing. "Setting traps here is a federal offense. This was all private hunting ground before you people took it," the man replied, his voice low with resentment. "My grandfather hunted these woods for 40 years. That was before the Watershed Protection Act," Emma countered. "This land is critical habitat now." The man's eyes narrowed. "Critical for who? The summer tourists who drive through once a year? The logging companies that still get permits while telling us locals to stay out?" Before Emma could respond, her radio crackled. "Emma, we've found something," came Dr. Nichols' voice. "You need to see this." The man took advantage of her momentary distraction, scrambling up the steep embankment behind him. Emma considered pursuing him, but turned back instead. They had his face now, and the more urgent matter was the bear and her cubs. When Emma returned to the site, she found the team gathered around the mother bear, their expressions grim. "What is it?" she asked. Dr. Nichols pointed to marks visible on the bear's neck and shoulder, old, healed scars forming a distinctive pattern. "This bear has been tagged before. She's from the Richardson study." Emma felt her stomach drop. The Richardson study had been one of the preserve's most ambitious research projects 5 years ago, tracking the declining black bear population throughout the region, gathering crucial data on habitat needs. It had ended when funding was cut, the data shelved before any meaningful policy changes could be implemented. "She's one of ours," Emma said softly, kneeling beside the tranquilizer gun Dr. Nichols had prepared. "We radio-collared her, tracked her for 2 seasons." "The collar's gone now," Mark observed. "Removed unprofessionally, judging by the scarring." Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions rising. This wasn't just any bear. This was an animal they had studied, protected, and ultimately failed when the project was abandoned. Now, here she was, caught in a poacher's trap, fighting to keep her newborns alive. "We'll need to take them all in," Dr. Nichols decided. "The cubs need immediate care, and her wound is infected. Once they're stabilized, we can assess when to release them." As they prepared the sedative, Emma noticed something clutched in the bear's paw, something that didn't belong in this forest setting. Carefully, she reached out with a gloved hand and extracted a small piece of orange plastic, weathered and chewed. Mark leaned closer. "Is that—" "A surveyor's marker," Emma confirmed, turning it over in her palm. "The kind used to mark boundaries for development projects." Their eyes met in shared understanding. The property adjoining the southern preserve border had been purchased by Northlake Development 6 months ago. The company had been pushing for a zoning variance, claiming their planned luxury resort would have minimal environmental impact. They promised they wouldn't start any work until the impact study was complete, Mark said, his voice tight with anger. "Looks like they're getting a head start," Emma replied. She pocketed the marker as evidence, just as Dr. Nichols administered the sedative to the mother bear. Within minutes, the bear's breathing slowed as the medication took effect. The team worked quickly, removing the cruel metal teeth of the trap from her injured leg, cleaning and treating the wound. All the while, Emma kept the cubs warm, monitoring their condition. The smallest cub, a female, was barely responsive, hypothermic and weak from lack of proper nursing. Emma cradled her inside her jacket, against her body heat, rubbing the tiny form gently to stimulate circulation. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered. "Your mom's going to be okay. We just need you to hold on." As they carefully loaded the sedated mother and her cubs into the specially equipped trailer, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. One that would test not only her professional skills, but her deepest convictions about wilderness, development, and the increasingly fragile boundary between the human and natural worlds. The smallest cub stirred against her chest, a barely perceptible movement that nonetheless kindled hope. Emma had always believed that every life mattered in the complex web of the ecosystem. Now, with development pressing in from all sides and wildlife increasingly cornered, that belief would be put to the test in ways she had never anticipated. Back at the Rehabilitation Center, a facility Emma had fought for years to fund and build, the team transferred the bear family to a secure recovery enclosure. The mother was still sedated, her breathing steady as Dr. Nichols finished treating her wound and administered antibiotics. The trap caused significant tissue damage, the veterinarian explained, but bears are remarkably resilient. With proper care and enough time to heal before winter, she should regain most function in that leg. Emma nodded, her attention focused on the smallest cub, now under a warming lamp, receiving fluids through a tiny IV line. The other two cubs were stronger, already attempting to nurse now that their mother was positioned properly. "What about this little fighter?" Emma asked, gently stroking the runt's fur with one finger. Dr. Nichols' expression softened. "The next 24 hours will be critical. She's severely dehydrated and her body temperature is still too low, but she's got a strong heart rate, which is promising." As the evening deepened into night, Emma remained at the center, monitoring the bear's condition and processing the evidence they'd collected from the site. The surveyor's marker, the illegal traps, photographs of the boot prints, all carefully documented and prepared for the regional conservation officer who would arrive tomorrow. She was examining the trap mechanism more closely when Mark entered the office area, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, placing one mug beside her. "Any change with the cubs?" "The 2 larger ones are stable. The little female is hanging in there, but it's touch and go." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "What about the search of the surrounding area?" "We found 4 more traps, all recently set, and something else." Mark pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph of what appeared to be a small clearing about half a mile from where they'd found the bear. Fresh survey stakes cutting lines through the underbrush. Someone's been mapping the area, well inside our boundary line. Emma studied the image, anger and determination solidifying into resolve. "They're pushing into protected land." "It gets worse," Mark continued. "I made some calls. North Lake Development recently hired a new head of operations, Thomas Garner. Why is that name familiar? Because his brother is State Senator James Garner, the one who's been pushing to reassess wilderness designations across the state." Emma set down her coffee, the implications sinking in. This wasn't just about one development project or one injured bear. It was about a systematic effort to undermine the very protections that kept these wild spaces intact. "We need more than just evidence of poaching," she said slowly. "We need to prove they're surveying illegally on preserved land." Mark nodded. "Which means we need to catch them in the act." A soft chime from Emma's computer interrupted them, an automated alert from one of the trail cameras at the preserve's southern boundary. The night vision image showed 2 men with equipment moving through the forest, their headlamps creating eerie circles of light among the trees. "Looks like we might get our chance sooner than expected," Emma said, already reaching for her field jacket. Call the night rangers. I want a team ready in 20 minutes. As she prepared to head back into the field, Emma stopped by the recovery enclosure for one last check on the bears. The mother was beginning to stir as the sedation wore off, her mighty body twitching slightly. The two stronger cubs had found their way to nurse, but the smallest one remained under the warming lamp, her tiny chest rising and falling with each precarious breath. Emma knelt beside the enclosure. "You keep fighting," she whispered to the fragile cub. "I'm going to make sure you have a forest to go back to." The runt made a tiny sound, almost like a sigh, as if acknowledging the promise. In that moment, Emma felt the full weight of her responsibility, not just to these individual animals, but to the entire ecosystem they represented. An ecosystem under threat from forces far more powerful than poachers' traps. As she joined the night patrol assembling outside, Emma knew that whatever happened in the coming hours and days would likely define her career and the future of Northbrook Preserve itself. The boundary between wilderness and development had never been a simple line on a map. It was a contested zone, constantly shifting with the tides of policy, profit, and public opinion. Tonight, she would defend that boundary with everything she had. The forest transformed at night. Familiar trails became mysterious passages, each shadow harboring potential danger or discovery. Emma led a team of 4 rangers through the darkness, their movements nearly silent despite the difficult terrain. Years of fieldwork had taught them all how to move through wilderness without announcing their presence. Their headlamps remained off. Their eyes adjusted to the darkness, using only the ambient moonlight filtering through breaks in the cloud cover. The rain had finally stopped, but water still dripped from leaves and branches, creating a gentle percussion throughout the forest. The trail cam picked them up near Junction Creek, Emma whispered to the team. "We'll approach from the north ridge to maintain higher ground." Ranger Jason Townsend, a former military tracker who had joined the preserve staff 3 years ago, pointed to a subtle disturbance in the undergrowth. Fresh boot prints, 2 individuals moving southwest. They followed the signs, advancing cautiously through the darkness. The air grew cooler as they descended into a shallow valley where mist clung to the forest floor, swirling around their legs like spectral tendrils. Emma's radio vibrated. A silent alert from Mark, who was coordinating from the ranger station. She checked the message. Second vehicle spotted at South Access Road. License plate matches North Lake Development. She signaled the team to hold position, then typed a quick response. "Any official permits filed for night work?" The answer came moments later. "None." "County confirms no authorized activity scheduled." That was all Emma needed. This was unauthorized entry into protected land, and combined with the illegal traps they'd discovered earlier, they had grounds to detain and question anyone they found. They continued forward, the terrain growing steeper as they approached the creek. The sound of water rushing over rocks provided natural cover for their movements, but also made it harder to detect others. Emma signaled for the team to spread out, maintaining visual contact while widening their search perimeter. It was Ranger Wilcox who spotted them first. 2 figures crouched by the creek bed, a sophisticated surveying instrument set up on a tripod between them. A soft red light blinked on the equipment, recording data points in the darkness. Emma observed them through her night vision binoculars. One man operated the equipment, while the other consulted a tablet, occasionally marking positions on what appeared to be a digital map. They worked with the efficiency of professionals who knew exactly what they were doing and what they shouldn't be doing on protected land after dark. She signaled the team to encircle the area, then keyed her radio to alert Mark. "We've got visual confirmation. 2 subjects with surveying equipment, approximately 50 meters inside the boundary line." "Copy that. Mark replied. "Conservation officers have been notified. Proceed with caution. These guys might be working for powerful people." Emma took a deep breath, centering herself. Then she stepped forward, switching on her powerful flashlight to illuminate the surveyors. "Northbrook Wildlife Authority. This is a restricted area. Remain where you are and identify yourselves." The men froze, momentarily blinded by the sudden light. Then the taller one lunged for a backpack. "Hands where I can see them," Emma commanded, her voice carrying the full authority of her position. The other rangers emerged from the darkness, their lights creating a circle of illumination around the surveyors. Surrounded and outnumbered, the men slowly raised their hands. "We have permits," the taller man said, his tone professionally indignant. "We're conducting authorized environmental assessment work for North Lake development." At midnight? Without notifying the Preserve Authority? Emma approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "I'm going to need to see those permits, and some identification." The second man, younger and visibly nervous, glanced at his companion. "Tim, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Evan," the first man hissed. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced a leather wallet, tossing it toward Emma. "Tim Garner, Director of Land Acquisition, North Lake Development. My permits are on the tablet." Emma's pulse quickened. Garner, the same name Mark had mentioned back at the center. This wasn't just some surveying crew. This was the brother of the state senator, personally overseeing the operation. She retrieved the wallet, verifying his identity while Ranger Townsend secured the tablet. The Rangers maintained their positions, flashlights steady on the two men. "Mr. Garner," Emma said, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite her rising anger, "you're currently 53 meters inside the Northbrook Wildlife Preserve boundary. No surveying permits have been issued for this location, and certainly not for work at this hour." "There must be some misunderstanding," Garner replied smoothly. "We have authorization to survey adjacent to the preserve for our environmental impact assessment. Perhaps there's been a mapping error." Ranger Townsend had been examining the tablet. "Ma'am, you should see this," he said, turning the screen toward Emma. The digital map displayed the preserve boundary, but not as it currently existed. The line had been redrawn, cutting nearly half a mile into protected territory, conveniently encompassing the most scenic overlook areas that would be prime real estate for North Lake's planned resort. "Interesting map you have here, Mr. Garner," Emma said, her voice hardening. "Because according to official county records and federal designation, you're standing on protected land. And based on the equipment readings I'm seeing, this isn't your first night out here." For the first time, Garner's confident demeanor faltered. "Look, there's been discussion at the state level about reassessing certain boundary designations. We're simply preparing for anticipated adjustments." "Anticipated by whom?" Emma challenged. "Because no such changes have been approved by the Department of Natural Resources or the Forest Service." The younger surveyor, Evan, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Tim, I told you we should have waited for the official rezoning before—" "I said, shut up," Garner snapped, then composed himself. "Ranger? Reed. Emma Reed, Senior Conservation Officer." "Officer Reed, I understand your concern, but I assure you, this project has support at the highest levels of state government. My brother is a state senator, yes, I'm aware," Emma finished for him. "However, this preserve operates under federal jurisdiction. So, unless your brother has suddenly become a U.S. senator without my knowledge, his influence has limits." Emma gestured to Ranger Wilcox, who began photographing the equipment and its positioning relative to known boundary markers. We'll be confiscating this equipment as evidence of unauthorized activity on protected land. You're both being detained for questioning in connection with this trespass and potential violations of the Wilderness Protection Act." As she recited their rights, Emma noticed Garner's expression shift from confidence to calculation. This man wasn't accustomed to having his plans thwarted, especially not by a park ranger on a rainy night in the backcountry. "You're making a serious mistake," he said quietly. "This project represents a $100 million investment and thousands of jobs for the region. Over what? A few acres of trees and some wildlife that could live just as happily elsewhere?" Emma thought of the mother bear fighting for her cubs back at the rehabilitation center, an animal they had once studied, then abandoned when funding dried up. She thought of the illegal traps, the surveyors' markers, the quiet erosion of protections that had been fought for over decades. "Mr. Garner, wildlife doesn't live happily elsewhere when its habitat is destroyed. And this preserve exists precisely to prevent the kind of incremental development that has already claimed 2/3 of this watershed." She met his gaze steadily. "If your project can't succeed without stealing protected land, perhaps it's not as valuable to the region as you claim." Garner's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more as the rangers escorted him and his colleague back toward the access road where their vehicle was parked. Emma stayed behind briefly with Ranger Townsend to secure the surveying equipment as evidence. "He's not going to let this go," Townsend observed, carefully dismantling the tripod. "I know," Emma replied, "but neither am I." Dawn broke over the rehabilitation center, pale light filtering through the windows of the observation room where Emma had spent the night. She'd returned from the field operation to find Dr. Nichols still monitoring the bear family, particularly concerned about the runt's deteriorating condition. "Her temperature keeps dropping," the veterinarian had explained. "I've tried supplemental feeding, but she's too weak to suckle properly." Through the night, they had taken turns holding the tiny cub against their bodies for warmth, administering fluids, and monitoring her vital signs. By morning, Emma's eyes burned from exhaustion, but a small victory had been won. The cub's temperature had stabilized, and she had accepted a few drops of formula from a specialized syringe. "Look at that," Dr. Nichols said, gently stroking the cub's head. "She's responding to the treatment." Emma smiled tiredly. "She's a fighter." "Like someone else I know," the veterinarian replied with a meaningful glance. "Mark called earlier, said you had quite a night." "We caught North Lake's people red-handed," Emma confirmed. "They were surveying well inside our boundaries, with maps already redrawn to claim our land." "And Garner was personally overseeing it?" Emma nodded, carefully transferring the cub to a warming pad next to her sleeping mother. The larger cubs had nursed through the night and now rested contentedly against their mother's side. "It wasn't just some rogue surveying crew. This goes straight to the top." Dr. Nichols sighed, removing her latex gloves. "Then we're in for a fight. The Garners have connections throughout the state government. They've been pushing development projects through protected areas for years." "I know, but this time we caught them in the act, with physical evidence." Emma checked her watch. "The regional director and the federal conservation officers should be here by 9. We'll present everything we found, the illegal traps, the surveyors' markers, the falsified boundary maps, photographs of their equipment placement." "And the bears?" Dr. Nichols asked softly, glancing at the sleeping family. "They're part of this too," Emma replied. "Especially since we confirmed she's from the Richardson study. She's not just any bear. She's one of the few remaining members of a documented population we were supposed to be protecting." She paused, watching the gentle rise and fall of the mother bear's breathing. "What they're doing isn't just illegal trespassing. It's actively destroying critical habitat for an already vulnerable population. The door opened, and Mark entered with a tray of coffee cups. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing one to Emma. "Regional Director Peterson just arrived. He's reviewing our incident reports now." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully. "And the conservation officers?" "En route. Should be here within the hour." Mark lowered his voice. "But we've got another problem. Senator Garner is apparently on his way too. His office called the governor's environmental liaison this morning." "That was fast," Emma remarked, unsurprised. "His brother must have made some calls after we detained him." "It gets worse," Mark continued. "Local news is reporting that the preserve is obstructing an economic development project that would bring jobs to the region. They're framing last night as heavy-handed enforcement against legitimate business interests." Emma felt a familiar weight settling in her chest, the crushing pressure of political and economic forces that so often overwhelmed scientific and conservation concerns. She had faced similar battles throughout her career, some won, more lost. Each time it seemed the boundary lines moved a little further, the protected areas shrinking, the concessions to development growing. "They can spin it however they want," she said finally. "We have evidence of illegal activity on federal land. That's not going to change because a state senator throws his weight around." Mark didn't look convinced. "Emma, you know how this works. They'll claim it was a mapping error, blame some junior employee, pay a fine, and still get their variance approved in the end." "Maybe," Emma acknowledged, "but not without a fight." She straightened her uniform shirt and finished her coffee. "I need to clean up before meeting with Peterson. Can you stay with the cubs until Dr. Nichols gets back?" Mark nodded, moving to take her place by the enclosure. "The little one seems stronger," he observed. "She is?" Emma smiled. "I've been calling her Fighter in my head." "Fits her," Mark agreed. "Goes well with her mother, too, the way she managed to keep those cubs alive despite everything." As Emma turned to leave, her phone chimed with an incoming email. She glanced at the screen and stopped, her expression hardening. "What is it?" Mark asked, noting her reaction. "It's from the Richardson Study Database. I requested the complete tracking history for our bear last night." She held up the phone, displaying a map with colored tracking lines. "Look at her range over the 3 years we monitored her. Every season, her territory shifted further north, away from the southern boundary." Mark studied the map. She was being pushed out of her preferred habitat. Exactly. And look at the dates. The shift accelerated right around the time the adjacent property was sold to Northlake's parent company. Emma zoomed in on the map. They've been gradually encroaching for years, even before the official purchase. The increased human activity, preliminary survey work, noise disturbance. It was already affecting wildlife patterns before a single permit was filed. "Can we prove that's connected to the development company?" "Maybe not directly," Emma admitted, "but combined with everything else we've documented, it builds a compelling case about the true environmental impact of their activities. Impacts they've conveniently omitted from their official assessment reports." The door opened again, and a young intern poked her head in. "Ms. Reed, Director Peterson is asking for you, and there are news vans pulling up outside." Emma exchanged a look with Mark. "News vans? Already?" "Looks like the Garners want to control the narrative," Mark said grimly. Emma steeled herself. This wasn't just about catching trespassers anymore. It was about to become a public battle for the future of the preserve itself. She had prepared for scientific arguments and legal challenges, but a media war was different territory. She glanced back at the Bear family one last time. The mother's eyes were open now, watchful but calm, trusting in the safety of her current surroundings while her cubs nursed and slept. Against all odds, she had survived, given birth, and protected her young. Now it was Emma's turn to protect them all. "Tell Peterson I'll be right there," she told the intern. "And Mark? Get me everything we have on North Lake's previous development projects. Environmental impact statements, permit applications, public comments, all of it." "What are you planning?" Mark asked, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. "If they want to make this public, we'll make it public. But we're going to tell the whole story, not just their convenient parts." Emma paused at the door. This was never just about a few acres or one bare family. It's about where we draw the line, and whether that line means anything anymore. As she walked toward the meeting that would likely define her career, Emma felt a strange calm settling over her. The exhaustion of the night faded, replaced by clarity of purpose. Some battles couldn't be avoided. They could only be faced with everything you had. The preserve's main conference room, normally used for staff meetings and educational presentations, had been hastily converted for what was becoming an impromptu summit. Regional Director Peterson, a career conservationist with 30 years of experience navigating the complex intersection of environmental policy and politics, sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with a furrowed brow. On one side sat Emma and Mark, joined by 2 federal conservation officers in their distinctive uniforms. On the other, Senator James Garner had arrived with his brother Tim, and a woman Emma recognized as Patricia Mercer, North Lake Development's chief legal counsel. Through the windows, Emma could see 3 news vans parked outside, reporters setting up cameras on the gravel lot. Someone, almost certainly the Garners, had ensured this meeting wouldn't remain private. "Let's be clear about why we're here," Director Peterson began, his deep voice commanding attention. "Last night, preserve officers apprehended individuals conducting unauthorized surveying activities within the boundaries of federally protected land. This follows the discovery of illegal trapping equipment that resulted in injury to protected wildlife. These are serious violations that warrant investigation." Senator Garner, a polished man in his 50s whose folksy campaign persona belied his Harvard law education, leaned forward with a conciliatory smile. "Director Peterson, we all agree that proper procedures should be followed. However, it appears there's been a significant misunderstanding based on outdated mapping references." He gestured to his brother, who opened a leather portfolio and removed several official-looking documents. "These are the approved survey permits from the State Department of Natural Resources, authorizing environmental assessment work for the North Lake Ridge Development Project." Patricia Mercer added smoothly, "Our surveyors were operating under the good faith belief that they were within the authorized assessment area. If there was any boundary confusion, it was due to inconsistencies between state and federal demarcation lines, an administrative issue that hardly warrants detaining our employees or confiscating expensive equipment." Emma maintained a neutral expression, though internally she seethed at their practiced performance. They had clearly anticipated this confrontation and prepared accordingly. Director Peterson examined the permits. These authorize survey work adjacent to the preserve, not within it, and they certainly don't authorize midnight operations without notification to preserve management. "A scheduling decision made to minimize disruption," Tim Garner replied. "We believed working during off hours would have less impact on wildlife and visitor experiences." Emma couldn't remain silent any longer. "Mr. Garner, when we detained you last night, you were using maps that had already redrawn the preserve boundary to claim protected land for your development. That goes well beyond a simple navigational error. The senator's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Officer Reed, isn't it? I understand you've been with the preserve for 12 years now." "Senior Conservation Officer Reed," Peterson corrected firmly. "And yes, she's been an exemplary member of our team for over a decade." "Then, Officer Reed should understand that boundary designations are periodically reviewed and adjusted based on evolving land use priorities," Senator Garner continued. "My office has been working with the Governor's Environmental Council on a comprehensive reassessment of wilderness designations throughout the state. Any such reassessment would require federal approval and public comment periods before implementation," one of the conservation officers interjected. "The current boundaries remain legally binding until such a process is completed." Mercer, the lawyer, nodded in acknowledgement. "Absolutely correct. And North Lake has no intention of violating established boundaries. What occurred last night was, at most, a case of premature assessment based on anticipated adjustments. Adjustments that would, of course, include substantial conservation offsets in other areas." Emma opened her data tablet. "With respect, Ms. Mercer, we have evidence suggesting this was not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of encroachment." She displayed the tracking data from the Richardson study. "This shows the territorial displacement of one of our studied bears over a 3-year period, directly correlating with increased activity from North Lake's preliminary assessment teams." She swiped to the next screen. "And this is the bear in question. Currently in our rehabilitation center after being caught in an illegal trap well within preserve boundaries, where she gave birth to 3 cubs while immobilized. The images were powerful. The mother bear's injured leg, the tiny cubs struggling to survive, the cruel metal teeth of the trap." Emma noticed a flicker of genuine discomfort cross the senator's face before his political mask reasserted itself. "A disturbing situation, certainly," he acknowledged. "But you can't possibly suggest North Lake had anything to do with illegal trapping. We've been vocal advocates for ethical land management practices." "I know." Emma gathered her materials. "But first, I need to check on our bear family. How's the little one doing?" "Fighter?" Mark smiled slightly. "Doctor?" "Nichols says she's showing improvement. Started nursing on her own about an hour ago." Emma felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. At least that battle was being won, whatever might come next. "You should get some rest," Mark suggested. "You've been up for over 24 hours. "Soon," Emma promised. "But first, I need to prepare our public statement. If the Garners want to try this in the court of public opinion, we need to make sure people hear the whole story. Not just about last night's enforcement action, but about what's really at stake." As she walked back toward the rehabilitation center, Emma's phone buzzed with news alerts. The first headlines were already appearing. "State Senator accuses Wildlife Preserve of obstructing economic development." "Jobs versus trees, Northbrook. Preserve under fire for aggressive enforcement. Development company claims harassment by federal wildlife officers." Emma pocketed her phone. Unsurprised, but still disappointed by the predictable framing. The truth was always more complex, less headline-friendly, harder to compress into sound bites and talking points. But she had evidence, documentation, and something the Garners didn't have. A living embodiment of what was at stake. In the quiet sanctuary of the rehabilitation enclosure, away from politics and cameras, the mother bear had positioned herself protectively around all 3 cubs. The smallest one, Fighter, had found her place at last, nursing alongside her siblings. Dr. Nichols looked up from her monitoring equipment as Emma entered. "Good timing," she said softly. "I was about to call you. Fighter's showing real improvement. Her body temperature's normal, and she's nursing consistently now. Emma approached the enclosure, watching the family with a sense of cautious hope. They've still got a long road ahead. Yes, the veterinarian agreed. But they've made it through the most dangerous part. Mother bears are remarkably resilient, and it seems like this little one inherited that quality. Resilience. Emma thought about the concept as she observed the bear family. In ecology, resilience wasn't just about individual survival. It was about the capacity of entire systems to absorb disturbances and reorganize while maintaining their essential functions. The mother bear had adapted to human encroachment for years, shifting her territory northward as development pressed against the preserve boundaries. But there were limits to resilience, thresholds beyond which recovery became impossible. Emma's phone buzzed again, another news alert. This one from a smaller, environmental-focused publication. Wildlife officer stands ground against powerful development interests. With it was a photo someone had taken of Emma facing Senator Garner outside the conference room, the bear enclosure visible in the background. A different narrative was emerging alongside the Garner's version, one that recognized the real conflict at the heart of this confrontation. "Dr. Nichols," Emma said, making a sudden decision, "how would you feel about allowing a carefully controlled media visit to document our bear family's recovery, complete with the data from the Richardson study showing how development has already impacted their habitat?" The veterinarian considered for a moment. It would need to be very controlled, minimal disruption, limited time, proper distancing, but it could be powerful. Put a face to what's at stake. Emma nodded. "That's what I was thinking. People need to see what we're fighting for, not just abstract concepts of conservation, but real animals, real consequences." As Emma began making notes for the media proposal, her phone rang. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Emma Reed," she answered cautiously. "Officer Reed," came an unfamiliar female voice. "This is Congresswoman Diana Winters. I sit on the House Natural Resources Committee, and I've been following the situation at Northbrook with great interest. I understand you've had quite a confrontation with the Garner brothers today." Emma straightened, surprised. Congresswoman Winters was a well-known environmental advocate, whose district included several national parks and wilderness areas. "Yes, Congresswoman. We're dealing with what appears to be a coordinated attempt to encroach on federally protected land." "So I've heard," the Congresswoman replied, "and I understand you have a rather compelling witness, a mother bear and her cubs who've been direct victims of this encroachment." "We do," Emma confirmed, wondering how the Congresswoman had learned these details so quickly. "I'll be in your area for a committee field hearing next week," Winters continued. "I'd like to visit Northbrook personally, and I'm bringing several of my committee colleagues with me." This situation with North Lake Development might be exactly the case study we need to strengthen federal protections against these incremental boundary violations we're seeing across the country. For the first time in days, Emma felt a surge of genuine hope. Local influence was one thing, but federal congressional interest was an entirely different level of scrutiny, one that even the Garners might find difficult to navigate. "We would be honored to host you, Congresswoman," Emma replied, "and we'll have comprehensive documentation ready for your committee's review." After the call ended, Emma looked back at the bear family with renewed determination. Fighter had fallen asleep, her tiny form rising and falling with each breath, secure between her mother's protective paws. "You just became the center of something much bigger than either of us expected," Emma whispered to the sleeping bears. "Let's make it count." The battle lines were drawn. Development versus conservation, short-term economic gain versus long-term ecological integrity, powerful political interests versus the fundamental protections that kept wild places wild. Emma had no illusions about the difficulty of the fight ahead or the resources her opponents would bring to bear. But for the first time in her career, she felt the momentum shift slightly in Wilderness's favor. The mother bear had fought to protect her cubs against overwhelming odds. Now it was humanity's turn to fight for their future, and for the boundaries, both literal and figurative, that would determine whether that future included truly wild places at all. The following week unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Emma's days became a carefully orchestrated balance between caring for the recovering bear family, preparing comprehensive documentation for the congressional visit, and managing the increasing media attention focused on Northbrook Preserve. The mother bear, whom the rehabilitation team had officially named Sierra in their records but still referred to as Mama in their daily interactions, continued to improve. The infection in her leg responded well to the antibiotics, and Dr. Nichols had begun reducing her pain medication as the wound showed signs of healthy healing. "She'll always have a slight limp," Dr. Nichols explained during their morning assessment. "The trap damaged some of the ligaments in ways we can't fully repair, but bears are remarkably adaptive. I've tracked others with similar injuries who adjusted their gait and continued to thrive in the wild." Emma nodded, watching as Sierra nursed her cubs with newfound strength. The two larger cubs, now named Cedar and Aspen in the official records, had nearly doubled in size since their arrival at the center. Fighter, the smallest cub, remained significantly smaller than her siblings but had developed a feisty personality that justified her nickname. Where the other cubs were content to nurse and sleep, Fighter seemed determined to explore every inch of the enclosure she could reach, often attempting to climb on her mother's back when she wasn't nursing. "She's going to be a handful when she starts walking properly," Mark observed, joining Emma at the observation window. He handed her a folder. "The latest press clippings about our situation. Thought you should see what we're dealing with." Emma leafed through the printouts. The initial narrative pushed by Senator Garner, portraying the preserve as an obstacle to economic progress, still dominated the major regional outlets. But alternative perspectives were gaining traction in environmental publications and even some national media. Several featured the photograph of Emma facing down the senator, which had become something of a symbol for the conflict. One headline caught her attention: "The Senator versus the Scientist. Northbrook Standoff Highlights America's Wilderness Dilemma." The article included quotes from several prominent ecologists who had worked on the Richardson study, lending scientific credibility to Emma's concerns about habitat fragmentation. "Not bad," Emma commented. "At least the scientific perspective is getting some coverage." "There's more," Mark said, pointing to another folder on her desk. "We've received over 2,000 emails and letters of support from conservation groups, environmental science departments, and ordinary citizens. The Wilderness Coalition is organizing a demonstration at the state capitol next week to protest the boundary adjustment proposals." Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for the support, but also concern about the situation becoming increasingly polarized. She had spent her career trying to build bridges between conservation and community interests, knowing that sustainable solutions required buy-in from all stakeholders. The current battle lines felt uncomfortably stark. "What about the local community?" she asked. "Are we hearing anything from the people who actually live near the preserve?" Mark's expression grew more serious. "It's mixed. The Chamber of Commerce is firmly backing Northlake. They've been promised a significant economic boost from the resort project. But the farming communities along the watershed have concerns about how development might affect water quality. They remember the contamination issues from the Westridge Development Project 10 years ago." Emma nodded thoughtfully. The Westridge situation had been a cautionary tale. A luxury development that had promised similar economic benefits, but ended up contaminating groundwater supplies for several downstream communities. The resulting lawsuits had dragged on for years, with many affected families receiving minimal compensation. We should reach out to the Watershed Protection Committee, she decided. They represent the agricultural interests that depend on clean water from the preserve. Their voices would add an important dimension to this conversation, one that goes beyond the oversimplified jobs versus trees framing. Before Mark could respond, Emma's phone rang. It was Director Peterson. "Emma, we've got a situation," he said without preamble. "Senator Garner has just announced an emergency state legislative hearing on wilderness boundary reassessment for tomorrow morning. They're fast-tracking their proposal, trying to push through state-level changes before the congressional committee arrives." Emma felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Can they do that? This is federally designated land. It's complicated, Peterson sighed. They're claiming this is merely a recommendation to federal authorities about optimal land use designations. But if the state officially endorses boundary changes, it creates political pressure that's hard to ignore, especially with midterm elections coming up. "Who's on this legislative committee?" Emma asked, already reaching for her tablet to take notes. 7 members. 4 are known Garner allies, including the chair. 2 have environmental voting records. 1 is a swing vote, Senator Maria Rodriguez from the Western District. Peterson paused. "You've been asked to testify about the enforcement action and the bear situation. I've also been called, along with the head of the State Economic Development Board, and of course, North Lake's representatives." Emma's mind raced. Tomorrow. They were moving with extraordinary speed, clearly hoping to establish state-level approval before the federal committee could intervene. It was a clever, tactical move. Create a fait accompli that would make federal opposition seem like an overreach. "I'll be ready," she assured Peterson. "But we need to mobilize our supporters to attend that hearing. And we need to reach Senator Rodriguez before the Garners do." After the call ended, Emma turned to Mark. "Change of plans. We need to prepare for a state legislative hearing tomorrow. The Garners are trying to outflank us." The next few hours dissolved into intense preparation. Emma worked with the preserve's small legal team to organize their documentation, focusing on the scientific evidence of habitat importance and the legal case for maintaining existing boundaries. Meanwhile, Mark coordinated with conservation groups to ensure the hearing room would be filled with supportive faces. By late afternoon, Emma felt as prepared as possible given the compressed time frame. She decided to take a break and check on Sierra and her cubs, a reminder of what they were truly fighting for beyond maps and legal arguments. As she approached the rehabilitation enclosure, she noticed Dr. Nichols speaking with an unfamiliar man in a suit. Something about his posture, slightly too rigid, eyes scanning the facility with careful assessment rather than curiosity, set off warning signals in Emma's mind. "Dr. Nichols?" she called out, approaching with a professional smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The veterinarian turned, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Not at all. This is Mr. James Harrington. He's conducting a facility assessment." The man extended a hand, his grip firm and impersonal. "Senior Officer Reed, I presume. Your reputation precedes you." Emma maintained her polite expression while mentally cataloging details. Expensive suit, professional demeanor, no identification visible. "What organization are you with, Mr. Harrington?" "I represent the State Environmental Quality Review Board," he replied smoothly. "Given the recent concerns about enforcement actions originating from this facility, we're conducting a standard review of operations, permits, and compliance." Emma exchanged a glance with Dr. Nichols. The State Environmental Quality Review Board was nominally independent, but had been increasingly staffed with industry-friendly appointees in recent years. And there was nothing standard about this surprise inspection. It was clearly part of the Garner's pressure campaign. "We're always happy to demonstrate our compliance," Emma replied evenly, "though, typically, we receive advance notice of official inspections." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Certain circumstances warrant expedited reviews. I've already examined your medication storage protocols and medical waste disposal systems. Dr. Nichols has been most accommodating." "I'm sure she has," Emma said. "Since you're here, would you like to see the reason for our recent enforcement actions? The Bear family is just through here." She led him to the observation window before he could object. Sierra was awake, attentively grooming Fighter while the other cubs slept nearby. The contrast between her powerful form and her gentle care of the tiny cub created a compelling image. "This is Sierra," Emma explained. "She was caught in an illegal trap well within preserved boundaries. While immobilized by her injuries, she gave birth to 3 cubs. Without our intervention, all 4 would have died. And our evidence connects the trapping directly to unauthorized activities by North Lake Development." Harrington observed the bears with an unreadable expression. "Impressive rehabilitation work," he acknowledged, "though one might question whether such intensive human intervention is appropriate for wildlife management. The resources dedicated to a single animal family could be seen as disproportionate." "We see it as fulfilling our core mission," Emma countered. "This bear represents one of the last breeding females from a population we've studied for over a decade. Her genetic contribution is irreplaceable for maintaining viable black bear diversity in this region." She pulled up the Richardson study data on a nearby monitor. "This shows Sierra's territorial range over 3 years. Note how she's been systematically displaced by encroaching human activity that our evidence now links directly to North Lake's pre-development work." Harrington glanced at the data with polite disinterest. "Scientific disagreements about wildlife management are beyond my purview. I'm focused on facility compliance." He made a note on his tablet. "I'll need access to your full operational records and staffing certifications." "Of course," Emma agreed. "Though, as this is federal land operating under Department of Interior regulations, our primary compliance requirements are federal rather than state. I'm sure you're aware of the jurisdictional boundaries." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly masked. "Jurisdictional questions are precisely what prompted this review, Officer Reed. When state and federal priorities conflict, thorough documentation becomes essential." The subtext was clear. They were looking for any technical violations, any paperwork deficiencies that could be used to challenge the preserve's credibility ahead of tomorrow's hearing. It was a common pressure tactic. Create administrative burdens that distract from the substantive issues. "Our records are meticulously maintained," Emma assured him with professional confidence. "Mark Tyler, our operations manager, can assist you with accessing everything you need. I'll ask him to meet you in the administrative office." After Harrington departed, Dr. Nichols sighed heavily. He's been photographing everything, making notes about the most trivial details. Asked about the exact temperature of the medication refrigerator, the precise schedule of painkiller administration. "They're fishing for anything they can use," Emma confirmed, "making sure we know we're under scrutiny. Classic intimidation tactic." She watched Sierra continuing to care for her cubs, seemingly oblivious to the political storm swirling around her family. How soon would they be ready for release under normal circumstances? Dr. Nichols considered. Sierra's leg needs at least 6 more weeks to heal properly. The cubs are developing well, but they rely entirely on their mother for protection and learning essential survival skills. Typically, we'd monitor a family like this through summer and fall, then release them before winter denning season so they could establish territory naturally. And if circumstances were to change, if this facility became compromised in some way? The veterinarian gave her a sharp look. "You're worried they might try to shut us down?" "I'm considering all possibilities," Emma replied. "The Garners have significant influence at the state level. If they can't get what they want through legitimate channels, they might look for other pressure points." Dr. Nichols frowned. A premature release would be dangerous for all 4 bears, especially Fighter. She's still catching up developmentally, and Sierra's injury makes her vulnerable to predators and competitive interactions with other bears. "That's what I thought," Emma nodded, "which means we need to ensure this facility remains operational, regardless of tomorrow's outcome." She glanced at her watch. "I need to prepare for the hearing. Can you compile a comprehensive veterinary assessment of Sierra and the cubs? Include projected rehabilitation timelines, release protocols, and the potential consequences of premature release or facility disruption. We may need that documentation sooner rather than later." As Emma walked back to her office, her phone chimed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Officer Reed? This is Senator Maria Rodriguez." Emma nearly stopped walking in surprise. The swing vote on tomorrow's committee, reaching out directly. "Senator, thank you for calling. I was hoping to speak with you before tomorrow's hearing." "I imagine you were," Rodriguez replied, her tone direct but not unfriendly. "I've been getting calls all day from both sides of this issue. The Garners are pushing hard for this boundary adjustment, claiming it's essential for regional economic development. And you're wondering about the conservation perspective," Emma supplied. "I know the general conservation arguments," Rodriguez corrected. "What I want is your specific assessment of this situation, without the political framing. You're the officer on the ground. What are we really talking about here?" Emma appreciated the senator's straightforward approach. "We're talking about approximately 640 acres of critical watershed habitat that provides an essential wildlife corridor connecting the northern and southern sections of the preserve. This isn't just nice-to-have wilderness. It's functionally necessary for maintaining viable wildlife populations throughout the entire ecosystem." She continued, warming to the subject. "The development plan would sever this corridor, effectively isolating wildlife populations on either side. Our research shows this would likely lead to genetic bottlenecking and eventual population collapse for several species, including black bears, mountain lions, and numerous migratory birds." "And the economic benefits North Lake is promising?" Rodriguez asked. "Are substantially overstated according to independent analyses," Emma replied. "The job creation numbers they're touting include temporary construction positions and make unrealistic assumptions about year-round occupancy rates for a luxury resort in this climate zone. Meanwhile, they're ignoring the economic value of the watershed services this land currently provides to agricultural communities downstream." There was a thoughtful pause on the line. "You mentioned you have a bear family in rehabilitation that's connected to this situation." "Yes, Senator. A mother bear caught in an illegal trap we found on preserved land, in an area where North Lake was conducting unauthorized surveys. She gave birth while trapped and injured. We have direct evidence linking North Lake's activities to this specific conservation impact." "I'd like to see that for myself," Rodriguez decided. "Before the hearing tomorrow? Can you accommodate a brief visit this evening?" Emma felt a surge of hope. "Absolutely, Senator. What time works for you?" I can be there at 7, no staff, no press, just a first-hand look at what we're discussing. I found that helps cut through the rhetoric on both sides. After confirming the details, Emma ended the call and immediately sought out Director Peterson to inform him of this unexpected development. He shared her cautious optimism. Rodriguez has a reputation for thorough due diligence, he noted. She frustrated both industry and environmental groups during the mining regulation debates by insisting on personally visiting several sites before voting. If she's making the effort to see the situation firsthand, it means she's taking this seriously. Which is why we need to ensure she gets an honest, unfiltered understanding of what's at stake, Emma agreed. No political positioning, no emotional appeals, just the facts and the bears. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Emma reviewed her testimony for the hearing, coordinated with legal experts from the Wilderness Coalition who had offered pro bono assistance, and ensured that Harrington received all the documentation he had requested, meticulously organized and annotated with relevant federal compliance standards. By early evening, the rehabilitation center had quieted. Most staff had departed, leaving only essential personnel monitoring the various animals under their care. Emma used the relative calm to center herself, reviewing her notes one last time, while mentally preparing for both the senator's visit and tomorrow's hearing. At precisely 7 o'clock, a single black SUV with government plates pulled up to the center's entrance. Senator Rodriguez emerged alone, dressed in a simple blazer and pants rather than the more formal attire typically worn for official functions. Emma met her at the door. "Thank you for making time for this visit, Senator," she said, extending her hand. Rodriguez's handshake was firm and direct. "Thank you for accommodating me on short notice. I prefer to see things with my own eyes when possible." Emma led her through the facility, providing a concise overview of the rehabilitation center's operations and the preserve's broader conservation mission. Rodriguez listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed a solid grasp of environmental policy and wildlife management principles. When they reached the bear enclosure, Sierra was alert, watching them cautiously while her cubs nursed. Fighter had positioned herself directly between her siblings, her small form almost hidden except for the occasional shifting as she competed for position. "That's Sierra," Emma explained. "She's approximately 7 years old based on our records from the Richardson study. The trap severed several tendons in her right hind leg, but she's responding well to treatment. The 3 cubs were born while she was immobilized by the trap. All female, which is significant for future population viability." Rodriguez observed the family with genuine interest. "And you have evidence connecting this injured bear to North Lake's activities?" Emma displayed the documentation they had prepared, the trap locations overlaid with North Lake's illicit survey markers, photographs of the surveyor's marker found in Sierra's paw, data showing the bear's progressive territorial displacement corresponding with increased development activities. "The pattern is clear," Emma concluded. "This isn't speculation or environmental alarmism. It's documented cause and effect." The senator studied the materials carefully, then returned her attention to the bears. "The smallest one seems determined," she observed, as Fighter pushed her way between her larger siblings to secure a nursing position. "We call her Fighter," Emma admitted with a small smile. "She was barely alive when we brought them in. Now she's making up for lost time." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say you can judge the character of any society by how it treats its most vulnerable members." She turned to Emma. "In nature, this cub would likely not have survived." "That's true," Emma acknowledged. "Natural selection can be harsh, but there was nothing natural about the trap that injured her mother. or the human activities that pushed this bear family into increasingly marginal habitat. A fair point, Rodriguez conceded. We've already intervened in natural processes through development and habitat fragmentation. The question becomes where we draw the line in that intervention in both directions. She continued observing the bears in silence for several minutes. Emma respected the senator's contemplative process, allowing her the space to form her own impressions without further advocacy. Finally, Rodriguez turned away from the enclosure. Officer Reed, I appreciate your time and the work you're doing here. I won't pretend this single visit resolves all the complex considerations at play, but it does provide important context for tomorrow's discussion. That's all I could ask for, Senator, Emma replied sincerely. These decisions should be made with full awareness of their consequences. For wildlife, for ecosystems, and ultimately for the people who depend on the services these natural systems provide. As they walked back toward the entrance, Rodriguez asked, Will these bears ever return to the wild? That's our goal, Emma confirmed. We're not creating pets or zoo exhibits. We're giving them a chance to recover from human-caused injury, then resume their natural place in the ecosystem. The senator nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow, Officer Reed. I suspect it will be quite a spirited discussion. After Rodriguez departed, Emma found herself drawn back to the bear enclosure. Sierra had settled her cubs for sleep, her massive body curled protectively around them. Fighter, as usual, had positioned herself closest to her mother's head, where she could nurse with minimal competition when she woke. Rest well, Emma whispered to the bear family. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for all of us. The state capitol building gleamed in the morning sunlight, its marble steps already crowded with people despite the early hour. Environmental activists with handmade signs stood on one side, while North Lake supporters, many wearing company-provided T-shirts with "Jobs Now" printed across the front, gathered on the opposite side. News crews positioned themselves strategically to capture the growing crowd. Emma, dressed in her formal uniform, made her way through the throng alongside Director Peterson and their legal advisor, Catherine Winters from the Department of Interior. They had arrived early to review their documentation and coordinate final strategy before the hearing. Inside the cavernous building, the tension was palpable. Legislative aides hurried through marble corridors, their footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Security was heightened, with additional officers positioned at key intersections. Quite the turnout, Catherine observed as they checked in with the committee clerk. The Garners have mobilized their business coalition effectively. So have the conservation groups, Emma noted, spotting several familiar faces from partner organizations filing into the hearing room. And we've got the Watershed Agricultural Coalition joining us, too. The hearing room itself was imposing. A high-ceilinged chamber with ornate woodwork and formal portraits of past legislators lining the walls. At the front, an elevated dais awaited the 7 committee members who would decide the fate of the preserve boundaries. Below them, a witness table with microphones stood ready for testimony. Emma took her seat in the front row, reviewing her notes one final time as the room gradually filled. Across the aisle, she spotted Tim Garner conferring with the development company's legal team. He caught her eye briefly, his expression a mixture of confidence and lingering resentment from their confrontation. At precisely 9 a.m., the committee members filed in, taking their positions on the dais. Senator Maxwell Jenkins, the committee chair and a known Garner ally, called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. This special session of the State Natural Resources Committee is now in session, he announced, his voice carrying through the room's excellent acoustics. We are convened to consider Resolution 157 regarding recommended boundary adjustments to the Northbrook Wildlife Preserve to accommodate economic development priorities. He continued with procedural matters, but his framing of the issue was already evident. This was about accommodation and economic priorities, rather than conservation or ecological integrity. The linguistic battleground had been established before the first witness was called. Our first testimony will come from Mr. Timothy Garner, Director of Land Acquisition for North Lake Development Corporation, regarding the proposed Ridgeview Resort project. Tim Garner approached the witness table with confident strides, arranging his materials with practiced efficiency. His testimony began with a polished presentation, highlighting the economic benefits of the proposed resort, job creation projections, tax revenue estimates, tourism growth potential. Digital renderings showed a tastefully designed complex that appeared to blend harmoniously with the natural surroundings. Our design philosophy centers on sustainable luxury that celebrates rather than dominates the natural environment, Garner explained, his voice resonating with conviction. We're not seeking to replace nature, but to provide managed access to its beauty while creating economic opportunities for local communities that have struggled since the decline of the timber industry. He displayed a map of the proposed development area. The land in question represents less than 1% of the total preserve acreage, yet it's positioned to create maximum economic benefit with minimal ecological disruption. Our environmental impact studies, conducted by independent analysts, indicate that with proper mitigation measures, wildlife populations will adapt successfully to this modest boundary adjustment. His testimony continued for nearly 30 minutes, addressing anticipated objections with prepared counterarguments. Emma listened carefully, noting how skillfully he presented development as aligned with rather than opposed to conservation values, a narrative crafted to appeal to moderates like Senator Rodriguez. When questioning began, the committee's pro-development members lobbed softball inquiries that allowed Garner to elaborate on economic benefits and minimize environmental concerns. Then, Senator Rodriguez leaned toward her microphone. Mr. Garner, your company's environmental impact analysis suggests wildlife corridors can be maintained through dedicated passages integrated into the development. How wide are these proposed corridors, and what evidence do you have that they would be utilized by larger mammals such as bears? Tim Garner hesitated momentarily, a brief but noticeable break in his fluent presentation. The wildlife passages would vary between 50 and 100 feet in width, depending on topography. As for utilization evidence, we've reviewed similar implementations in other development projects, though admittedly under somewhat different ecological conditions. Rodriguez pressed further. Have you conducted any specific studies on the movement patterns of the black bear population in Northbrook specifically? The data I reviewed last night indicates these bears typically maintain a minimum corridor width of half a mile when navigating between habitat zones. We believe proper design elements, including vegetative cover and minimal human activity zones, can compensate for reduced width, Garner responded, his confidence slightly diminished. Bears are adaptable creatures. Thank you, Mr. Garner, Rodriguez concluded, making a note in her folder. After several more witnesses supporting the development, including the Chamber of Commerce president and a labor union representative emphasizing job creation, Emma was called to testify. As she took her seat at the witness table, Emma felt the weight of all eyes in the room. Her testimony would not have the polished production value of North Lake's presentation, but it had something more valuable: scientific integrity and first-hand evidence. Senior Conservation Officer Emma Reed, she began, serving as the lead biologist at Northbrook Wildlife Preserve for the past 12 years. I'm here today to provide factual context regarding the ecological significance of the land in question, and to address specific enforcement actions related to unauthorized activities by North Lake Development. She proceeded methodically, presenting the scientific data first, habitat connectivity requirements, population viability analyses, watershed protection metrics. Rather than abstract numbers, she connected each data point to tangible outcomes for wildlife, water quality, and ecosystem resilience. Then, she shifted to the specific enforcement incident, carefully documenting the illegal trapping, boundary violations, and direct impacts on wildlife, specifically Sierra and her cubs. This is not a hypothetical concern or a speculative projection, Emma emphasized, displaying photographs of Sierra's injuries and the cubs in their vulnerable state. This is the current, documented impact of development activities encroaching on protected land. The trap that injured this bear was located in an area where North Lake was conducting unauthorized surveys using falsified boundary maps that had already incorporated the adjustments being proposed today. She presented the evidence connecting North Lake directly to the incident: the surveyor's marker found in Sierra's paw, the mapping tablet showing altered boundaries, the timeline correlating the bear's territorial displacement with development activities. What we're witnessing is not a proposal for future boundary adjustment, but an attempt to legitimize existing encroachment after the fact, Emma concluded. The question before this committee is not whether to allow a minor boundary change, but whether to condone a deliberate strategy of incremental habitat degradation, followed by claims that the damaged land is no longer worth protecting. Senator Jenkins, visibly displeased with her framing, cut in before she finished. Officer Reed, your characterization of North Lake's activities as deliberate habitat degradation seems highly inflammatory and prejudicial. Do you have direct evidence of intent, or are you merely speculating about motives? Emma had anticipated this line of attack. Senator, I'm presenting documented patterns of activity and their consequences. The mapping tablet confiscated during our enforcement action contained boundary lines that had been redrawn before any official approval process. Those altered boundaries exactly match the locations where illegal traps were discovered. These are factual connections, not speculations about motive. Before Jenkins could continue his hostile questioning, Senator Rodriguez intervened. I'd like to ask about the rehabilitation status of the bear family you mentioned, Officer Reed. What would be the impact on these animals if the proposed boundary changes were approved? The impact would be severe, Emma replied, grateful for the opportunity to refocus on the ecological consequences. The area in question contains critical denning habitat used by this specific bear population. Our tracking data shows Sierra has denned within the proposed development zone for 3 consecutive winters. If displaced, she and her cubs would be forced into marginal habitat with higher competition and predation risk, particularly given her injury. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, alternating between hostile interrogation from development supporters and substantive policy inquiries from the environmentally focused members. Throughout, Emma maintained her professional composure, consistently bringing the discussion back to documented facts rather than being drawn into political arguments. When she finally returned to her seat, Director Peterson squeezed her shoulder supportively. "Well done," he whispered. "You gave them nothing they can use against us procedurally." The hearing continued with testimony from agricultural representatives concerned about watershed impacts, economic analysts challenging North Lake's job creation projections, and finally Senator Garner himself, who spoke not as a witness but from his position on the dais, lending the full weight of his political influence to his brother's project. This committee faces a clear choice between progress and stagnation, the senator declared. between economic opportunity and bureaucratic obstruction. The dedicated civil servants at Northbrook Preserve are well-intentioned, but their perspective is necessarily limited to a single priority. As legislators, we must balance conservation with the broader needs of our constituents: jobs, growth, and prosperity. As the hearing approached its conclusion, Chair Jenkins announced, "The committee will now recess for 30 minutes to deliberate before voting on Resolution 157. The room buzzed with tension as the committee members filed out. Emma checked her phone, finding several messages from Dr. Nichols updating her on Sierra's condition. The bear was continuing to improve, and significantly, Fighter had now matched her siblings in nursing vigor, if not quite in size. Emma smiled at this small victory amid the larger battle. Whatever happened in this hearing room, that tiny cub was fighting her way toward a future. The question was whether that future would include a viable habitat for her to return to. Director Peterson approached, his expression grave. "We're hearing rumors that Jenkins has the votes locked up. 4-3 in favor of the boundary change. Rodriguez is apparently still on the fence despite her questions." Emma's heart sank. After everything they had presented, the political machinery appeared poised to advance regardless of the evidence. It was a familiar disappointment in her conservation career, scientific reality taking a back seat to economic expediency. As she contemplated what more they could have done, Emma noticed a commotion at the back of the hearing room. A group of people had entered, headed by a distinguished woman in a tailored suit whom Emma recognized immediately from news coverage, Congresswoman Diana Winters, accompanied by 3 other members of the House Natural Resources Committee. Their unexpected arrival sent ripples of reaction through the room. Senator Garner, who had remained on the dais, visibly stiffened. Reporters who had been lounging during the recess suddenly straightened, cameras at the ready. Director Peterson looked as surprised as everyone else. "Did you know they were coming today? I thought the congressional visit wasn't scheduled until next week." "I had no idea," Emma replied honestly. Congresswoman Winters made her way directly to Emma and Peterson, extending her hand. "Officer Reed, Director Peterson, I apologize for arriving unannounced. When we learned about this emergency hearing, we rearranged our schedules. Congressional oversight doesn't operate on state legislative timetables." The implications of her statement, that the federal committee was asserting its preemptive authority, were lost on no one in the room. The message was clear. Whatever the state committee decided today would still face federal scrutiny. "We're grateful for your interest, Congresswoman," Peterson replied diplomatically. "More than interest, Director," Winters clarified. "The House Committee has initiated a formal review of potential Wilderness Act violations regarding Northbrook Preserve. We'll be conducting our own hearings next month, with subpoena power for all relevant documentation from both state agencies and private corporations involved in this situation." She turned to address the room more broadly, her voice carrying with the practiced projection of an experienced legislator. "While state recommendations regarding land use are certainly valued, I want to remind everyone present that federally designated wilderness areas operate under congressional authority. Any substantial boundary modifications require federal approval following proper environmental impact assessment, a process that typically takes 12 to 18 months. The Congresswoman and her colleagues took seats in the rear of the chamber, their presence a physical reminder of the federal government's ultimate authority over the preserve. The assembled crowd murmured with renewed speculation about how this development might influence the state committee's deliberations. When the committee members returned from their recess, Chair Jenkins appeared visibly irritated by the new arrivals. With a sharp rap of his gavel, he called the session back to order. Before we proceed to a vote on Resolution 157, Senator Rodriguez has requested time for a final statement. All eyes turned to the swing vote as she leaned toward her microphone. Thank you, Chair Jenkins. After careful consideration of the testimony presented today, along with my personal site visit to the preserve yesterday evening, I find myself concerned about the precedent this resolution would establish. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. While economic development is undoubtedly important to our state, so too is the integrity of our natural resources and the processes established to protect them. The evidence presented by Officer Reed regarding unauthorized activities within preserve boundaries suggests that we are not discussing a hypothetical future boundary adjustment, but rather the post facto legitimization of existing encroachment. Senator Garner shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Rodriguez continued. Furthermore, I cannot ignore the clear ecological evidence regarding habitat connectivity and watershed protection. The economic benefits projected by North Lake development, while significant, appear to be overstated when compared with independent analyses, and they fail to account for the economic value of ecosystem services provided by the intact preserve. She straightened her papers deliberately. For these reasons, I cannot support Resolution 157 as currently written. I would, however, be open to a modified resolution that establishes a joint state-federal commission to explore sustainable development opportunities adjacent to, but not within, current preserve boundaries, with robust environmental safeguards and community benefit requirements. The room erupted in murmurs. Chair Jenkins, visibly displeased, called for order before announcing, "We will now proceed to a vote on Resolution 157 as written." The roll call proceeded with predictable results from the first 6 members, 3 in favor, 3 opposed, leaving Rodriguez as the deciding vote. When her name was called, she replied firmly, "No." With that single syllable, the resolution failed. Chair Jenkins quickly adjourned the hearing, but the real action shifted to the crowded hallway outside, where reporters swarmed both the state legislators and the congressional delegation. Emma found herself pulled into an impromptu press conference alongside Congresswoman Winters. "This vote isn't the end of the process," Winters was explaining to the assembled media. "My committee will be conducting a comprehensive review of all activities related to Northbrook Preserve, with particular attention to potential violations of federal conservation law. We're especially concerned about the evidence presented today regarding unauthorized boundary activities and wildlife impacts." A reporter turned to Emma. "Officer Reed, how do you respond to North Lake's claims that the preserve's enforcement actions were unnecessarily aggressive and potentially motivated by anti-development bias?" Emma chose her words carefully. "Our enforcement protocols are based on documented violations of established boundaries and wildlife protection statutes. The trap that injured the mother bear, who is currently rehabilitating with 3 newborn cubs, was found well within preserve boundaries, and we have direct evidence linking it to unauthorized surveying activities. Our enforcement is guided by environmental law, not political positions." As the press conference continued, Emma noticed Tim Garner and Senator Garner exiting the Capitol building, surrounded by their own contingent of reporters. Their expressions were tight with controlled anger, but Emma knew this setback wouldn't end their ambitions. Today's victory was significant but temporary. The larger battle for Northbrook's boundaries would continue.